Couple of days. Brendan Beery joining us, the professor at Western Michigan Cooley School of Law, also a legal analyst here for us for 10 Tampa Bay. And Brendan, I do have to ask you first, did you get enough sleep last night? Have you been able to kind of relax? No? Okay, so we're on the same page here. We're both sleep deprived.
Right. Yeah, it was a 4 o'clock in the morning bedtime. And I'll tell you, things sure changed between then and when I got up a few hours later.
Yeah, they did. They certainly did.
Yeah.
And things changed from a legal perspective, too, of what could potentially be happening here. So for those watching, again, on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, I want to run you through kind of what the conversation will be like with Brendan and I. I want to open it up to you guys as well. If you have some questions, tweet at me at @RY_Bass. If you're on Twitter, if you're watching on YouTube, try to post those comments below, and I'll try to get to them. If you're watching us on Facebook, try to post those as well. I'll try to answer some of your questions if you have some legal questions that you want Brendan to answer. I want to start here, Brendan, because let's go back to last night, right? Because we went to bed thinking maybe this race could go one way, and nothing has been officially called yet, but it seems to be leaning a different direction now. Last night, President Trump came out and had said that they want votes to be stopped from counting in certain swing states. Swing states he was leading in prior to this morning, which would be Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. He said he wanted the counting to continue in states where he was behind, like Arizona. So let me ask you first on the basis of counting votes. These are legitimate votes, absentee ballots that were in either prior to or on Election Day, right? So what is the legal basis here, I guess, in your opinion, to potentially have these votes be illegitimized?
The only claim that President Trump could make would be that somehow a state is violating state law, right, in the way that it's going about counting votes. That I suppose you could also raise a constitutional claim. This is something you and I talked about last night. Yep. Sometimes the Equal Protection Clause comes into play, where somebody will, a candidate will claim that by counting votes a certain way, you're diluting other votes, and so that violates the one person, one vote principle. But as I said last night, that's a pretty tough climb when you're talking about a case like this. The way most judges see it is that the one person, one vote, the equal vote principle requires that votes be counted, right? Not that they not be counted. And mail-in ballots have been used for a long time. Again, this is all governed under state law, depending what state you're in. And the counting of mail-in ballots it varies from state to state. There are states like Florida that are really good about it.
We've gotten really good, Brendan. We've gotten really good since 2000, right?
Yeah, right. Got a little bit of pressure there, right?
Yeah, certainly. Continue on. Sorry, my friend.
Right. No, but yeah, it's true though. You don't want to be the national punchline. But Florida is very good. We start counting early. So that these counts are ready to go. As everybody saw last night, Florida was called, in sort of a routine fashion on election night. Then you have states like Pennsylvania and Michigan. Michigan has been called today, from what I understand, but Pennsylvania is still watching.
AP and CBS have both called Michigan, by the way, in favor of Biden. So to answer your question,
that's huge, obviously, but they, so they got their count done today, even though they started counting on election day. So Pennsylvania is not as well-oiled of a machine as Michigan is, so we're still waiting on Pennsylvania. But that's the way it works under state law. And so, it's Pennsylvania lawmakers who decided that we're not going to start counting until election day. And so that's the way it works. It was predictable. It's also one of the interesting parts about this too is everything's inverted. We keep saying the late vote that's coming in Pennsylvania, but actually the late vote was the early vote.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's the interesting thing here, Brendan, is because these aren't necessarily late votes. These are votes that, again, mail-in ballots, absentee ballots that were in prior to Election Day or were there on Election Day. We're not even talking about the 3 days after Election Day where they were granted that by the Supreme Court. We're not even talking in North Carolina, 3 to 9 days and the extension they were given there. And just quickly, I want you to take me through the process of these key states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, some of the states where we saw late, Wisconsin as well, late litigation that determined how ballots could be processed after Election Day. We're not there yet, right? I mean, some of these rules that went in place and the way the law was cited here hasn't even come into play yet. But as it stands right now, again, these ballots, just to repeat what you've talked about, these are legitimate, right? It's going to be really hard to make that claim from the president's standpoint that these aren't legitimate ballots that are being counted right now.
Yeah, almost impossible. And I think the only state where what's really in play now in terms of litigation, and there was a lawsuit filed today, and a claim that was filed with the U.S. Supreme Court, in fact. Trump and the Republicans are going to argue about the 3-day extension that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court sort of read into Pennsylvania law, right? Pennsylvania Supreme Court said under our Constitution, under our equal voting provision in our Constitution, that any vote that's postmarked on Election Day or before has to be counted if it's received within 3 days. That now there's a claim by the Republicans that is unconstitutional at the federal level, the U.S. Constitution, because the U.S. Constitution says that state legislatures make the rules with regard to running elections and counting votes. And of course, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is not the state legislature. And there are conservative justices on the court who have flirted with maybe taking that up. But even if the Trump campaign was to win on that claim, that only affects any ballots that. Then you have to imagine this is very few.
Yeah.
Any ballots that were postmarked, Election Day, and that would be received in the next 3 days. Not that we're already there. Those are not at issue, right? Any ballot that was there, as you were just saying, any ballot that was received already by Election Day is not even part of that claim.
And those are the ballots now, Brendan, that are being tabulated at this point. These are the ballots that were received, again, either prior to or on Election Day. And some of these states like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, had chosen to count those in-person ballots first, those ones that were cast on Election Day prior to getting to those either early vote or mail-in ballots, absentees that you're seeing. I do want to get to one. This is a recent tweet from the president, and I will read it to you verbatim so you kind of have an opportunity to process it here. And again, for those of you watching on YouTube, on Facebook, on our 10 Tampa Bay Twitter page, Ryan Bass, Brendan Beery here with you. We're getting Brendan's expertise on what we could see tonight and the days and weeks to come here as post-election litigation. Again, not over yet, but we could see potentially a lot of litigation to come. We'll try and answer some of your questions, so please be patient with us as we try to have a little conversation here. But this is President Trump's tweet just a few minutes ago, Brendan. Our lawyers have asked for, quote, meaningful access as far as what the legal standpoint is here. Meaningful access for some of the counting. We've seen that argument being made in places like Pennsylvania, right? In Wisconsin, they're asking for a potential recount. In Michigan, what is meaningful access? Can you give us kind of an insight from that perspective for those that aren't as up to speed on the legal jargon, what that means and what could be potentially argued here?
Yeah, there are a couple things. One is that campaigns are just allowed to have observers, right, in those places where ballots are being counted. And also, there are mechanisms in every state for challenging, particularly mail-in ballots, right? If one side thinks there's some kind of defect, and the claim, I'm hearing this claim and the tweet that you just read, I haven't seen any evidence of it, but I've seen the claim, right? That we're not being allowed to have enough challengers, we're not being allowed to have enough observers. This is on the part of the Trump campaign arguing that. And therefore, there's no transparency. Now, they seem to be focusing that argument on Pennsylvania, and in particular Philadelphia.
Which, as you mentioned, might not even come into play here if Biden reaches 270 without it, right?
That's right. That's right. It's and to say that Philadelphia is messing around with ballots, they've had trouble there in the past with some ballot corruption, and as a result, Philadelphia live streams from its facility where they're doing vote counting. So it's again
to be as transparent as possible, right? That's it. That's to be transparent.
That's right. And so if transparency is the argument, and you're in federal court arguing that they're not being transparent, and the judge can sit there and watch it on the computer. There are legal arguments that don't get you very far, and there are factual arguments that don't get you very far. And this falls into that latter category. It just doesn't seem to be consistent with the way things are being carried out.
Again, we're going to try to answer some of your questions here. I see a lot of you posting on our 10 Tampa Bay Facebook page. We certainly appreciate that. Ryan Bass and Brendan Beery here with you, joining us as we continue to have the conversation and what will be driving the conversation, I'm sure, even after a potential winner gets projected here for the presidency in this post-election litigation and what we could see. And Brendan, I just want to take kind of a bird's eye view for a second, just step back, because heading into this election, we had so much COVID-19 related litigation because of mail-in balloting and just some of the states and rules. From your perspective, just what we're looking at right now, just the amount of cases that were out there being decided. Is this normal? I mean, I know we're in a non-normal year, but just is this something that is normal and we're just being more aware of it now in 2020?
Yeah, I think the amount of litigation was not normal, but it is related to what you say, the COVID outbreak. So much of this almost sounds like a cop-out, but so much of this depends on state law. Every state has statutes about how its elections should be run. And some states give election officials a lot of leeway in terms of changing the way elections are held in the middle of, sometimes you'll see a statute that will say natural disaster or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the big legal issue becomes, is COVID-19 a natural disaster? So when you have these statutes that give officials, including governors, leeway in how to run elections, that invites litigation. And so that requires that judges interpret what is meant by the language in those statutes.
There's certainly a lot of lawyers that will be skimming through and going through, what has happened, obviously, in this election. Just again, and I don't want to make sure this is a bipartisan discussion here. This isn't, leaning left or leaning right. This is a conversation on what we could potentially see from a standpoint of litigation with this election. I do want to ask about the Supreme Court, Brendan, because that's been a conversation, rightfully so, with the Republican-controlled Senate and President Donald Trump, his nominee being confirmed in Amy Coney Barrett onto the high court there. That obviously gave the Supreme Court a conservative majority. There's been discussion, and even the president yesterday said he wants the Supreme Court to be involved here and to review ballots, to potentially stop counting. We've talked already about that. But what are the chances that this gets to the high court? I know the president might want to see it there, but just because he says it doesn't necessarily means it goes there, right? Right.
And, there are different personalities and characters in play here. One is John Roberts, the Chief Justice. Who I think, in reading the tea leaves, he wants nothing to do with this election. I think that he's very concerned with the institutional reputation of the Supreme Court. When you're the Chief Justice, it's sort of your name goes on the court, right? The Warren Court, the Rehnquist Court, now it's the Roberts Court, and he's aware of that historical perspective. And he is definitely an institutionalist. He does not want to do anything, get the court involved in anything that could cause too much controversy. Political in particular, obviously. But on the other hand, I don't know where some of the other justices stand on this. And of course, the one we're watching is the one you mentioned, Amy Coney Barrett. And she did not, now this same case, this Pennsylvania case is sort of a yo-yo case. It goes up to the Supreme Court, comes back, and then there've been a couple bites at the apple here. So this is the third time that the Trump campaign or the Republicans have asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review that Pennsylvania Supreme Court extension, right, at the 3-day extension.
Yep.
The last time, Justice Barrett recused, I got to correct myself. Justice Barrett did not participate in that, but the Supreme Court then issued a statement, kind of an unusual statement, clarifying that the only reason she didn't participate was that she was not prepared because she hadn't been on the court long enough to read the briefs. So she did not recuse herself for any kind of a conflict. And that is something that lawyers are really going to be watching carefully. She has not done anything. She conducted herself perfectly well at the Senate hearing. She has not said or done anything to indicate that she would be biased or prejudiced. The problem is that the president has repeatedly made statements publicly, right, that I want a ninth justice so the Supreme Court can decide the election. That puts her in an almost impossible situation ethically, because judges don't just avoid actual conflicts, and I'm not suggesting there is one. they also have to avoid the appearance of conflicts. Now, having said that, the only person who's going to decide whether she recuses herself would be her. When you're a Supreme Court justice, you're sort of on top of the world, right? So there's no higher court to tell you that you have to recuse yourself.
And you're there for life, too.
That's right. You can't get fired. They can't cut your pay, right? So it's a pretty good gig. And so she'll make that decision herself. But again, and I want to be clear, I'm not faulting her or suggesting anything about her viewpoint. But with the public statements that have been made, that it's when you're a lawyer, sometimes, and it's sort of an analogous relationship. When you're a lawyer, sometimes, you tell your client the best thing you can do is not talk at all. Don't say anything. I've told clients that before. Don't say anything to anybody who isn't me, right? And so
I'm learning something here. Thanks, Brendan. You're giving me some tips from the legal perspective.
Right. Yeah, say nothing, right?
I do want to ask you, we're getting some questions here, Brendan, on our 10 Tampa Bay Facebook page, and I think this is an important one because there's been a lot of conversation about recounts. And Karen Taylor here on our 10 Tampa Bay Facebook page asks, is it normal to challenge a less than 1% win? I'll give the short answer here. It differs state by state as far as recounts are concerned. But from a legal perspective, if you can kind of chime in here and answer less than 1%, kind of what is the barometer as far as the legal perspective is concerned?
Yes. So that is the benchmark. 1% is often the benchmark. Again, it varies from state to state, but 1% is, I think, almost universal. However, now the one state where this is an issue right now, President Trump indicated that he was going to ask for a recount in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin has a law that, again, is pretty typical of most states. If, and this is going to be really interesting to see what happens because, they've indicated they want to recount, but we'll see. Basically, the president lost, I think, by about 0.6%.
20,000 votes or so in Wisconsin.
20,000 votes, right.
And he won, by the way, 4 years ago by 0.7 percentage points. And they had a recount back then in 2016.
Right. So, Wisconsin is boy, talk about the razor's edge.
I think it's now or at least 4 times since 2000, Brendan. I didn't mean to cut you up, but 4 times since 2000, I believe they've been decided within a percentage point. You want to talk about the ultimate tipping state? That's certainly been it. But continue your point.
Yeah. It's always fun to watch Wisconsin. But under their law, if you lose by 0.25 or less, then the state pays for a recount. If you lose by more than that, and President Trump has lost by more than that in Wisconsin, but it's still under 1%, then you can have a recount, but you have to pay for it.
So wait a minute, expand on that a little bit. So the president here, if he does want a recount to move forward in the state of Wisconsin, which was the first state he asked for as far as a recount perspective here, he would have to foot the bill for that?
That's right. Yep. He lost by a small enough margin to trigger a recount if he wants one, but too much for the state to pay for it. State says if you're not, and Wisconsin, they have an interesting history here. They've had recounts in Wisconsin, and the history there is even when there are tens of thousands of votes separating two sides, recounts in Wisconsin never budge, more than a couple dozen.
I believe I was
votes.
looking, Brendan, too, and I think it's since 2000 to 2015, and forget me, I don't have the proper credit here, but there were some 4,600 recounts I think we're talking about, and not, across the state. And I think they swayed by a couple hundred votes, right? Maybe an average of 230 or something around that figure. Again, this is a paraphrasing, not accurate here, but these recounts, at least in Wisconsin, haven't necessarily made a big difference to make up for a 20,000 vote gap.
Right, and that's why in Wisconsin they say, we count our votes accurately. We'll do a recount, but we're not paying for it. If you
guys want to pay for
it. That's right, and we know how much the Trump campaign loves paying for things, right? So when it comes time to say, okay, fork over the cash and we'll do a recount, I don't know if they'll bother. Hillary Clinton, you mentioned lost by a similar margin, and she did not ask for a recount in Wisconsin.
Certainly interesting there. It was razor thin 4 years ago. Looks like it's going to be razor thin here again in 2020. I want to take us back to 2000, Brendan. What were you doing back then? What do you remember about Bush v. Gore in 2000 here in Florida?
Well, the key thing about Bush v. Gore is that Florida was the only state, right, that was in play, and it was everything, right? And so, let's say Pennsylvania, and you mentioned this earlier, if Pennsylvania is sort of the focus of all the litigation, but in the event, I'm not trying to forecast anything,
of course.
In the event that Arizona and Nevada go to Biden, then it's the suspense is nowhere near the same because Pennsylvania doesn't decide the election. It's reminiscent, right, of what happened in 2000. I certainly was following it back then, and I think one of the nice things about what's going on. I shouldn't say there's nice things going on, but one of the things that I feel better about than 2000 is this. I don't think this is going to drag on for as long.
So no round two of Bush v. Gore here in 2020. You don't think?
Right. And I think I think the Supreme Court. A lot of people don't know this. In Bush versus Gore, the Supreme Court, when it issued its opinion, actually said, "Don't ever cite this opinion ever again in any other case." This is a one-off, and it's not precedent for anything. And since Bush versus Gore, there's been so much criticism and so much controversy around that that federal courts are really going to be hesitant to get involved if there's anything they can do. To say it's moot, to say the parties don't have standing, to dismiss on jurisdictional grounds, to get rid of these lawsuits without having to get involved. But certainly, I saw another tweet recently, just about an hour or so ago, where Rudy Giuliani said that they're going to have a national lawsuit, and you get lawyers asking what that even means. That's, right?
What does that mean? I'll ask you. What does that mean?
I don't know what it means, right? Because you have to pick your targets. You can't just have a blanket lawsuit saying we're suing, we're suing the country, right? So they don't seem like they're very targeted. I think it's Giuliani. It doesn't seem like he's very targeted. It hasn't identified a cause of action. That's kind of a little detail you shouldn't leave out when you sue somebody, right? What are you suing them for? There's going to be litigation, but who knows what it is.
537 votes, by the way, was what was decided by in Florida, and then ultimately that handed the presidency to George W. Bush when the Supreme Court ordered the recount to stop. We talked about that, and you had just mentioned kind of litigation in the days to come. From your expertise, and I know that you can't certainly predict the outcome, but I would just like to know from all of your legal background what you think the next couple of days could hold as America kind of holds its breath here. This has been, there's no question about this. This isn't a right or left issue. This has been the most polarizing election maybe of many lifetimes. Not my lifetime, not your lifetime, maybe many lifetimes. We saw 160 million votes cast. That's the most since 1900. Polarizing or not, a lot of people came out to the polls this year. A lot of people supported President Trump in his bout for re-election. A lot of people, as evidenced by the Electoral College, by the popular vote, I should say, are siding with Joe Biden. He already surpassed Hillary Clinton's margins of 2.9 million in the popular vote from 4 years ago. This has been polarizing. What do you think? A long-winded question, but probably a simple answer from you. What do the next couple of days, weeks, and months look like?
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question. And a lot of lawyers, especially constitutional lawyers in my field, are paying close attention to First Amendment issues for the next few days because we're waiting to see what kind of response there is on both sides. No matter who wins, who loses, whether we're going to see demonstrations, whether we're going to see that kind of acting out, obviously, anytime you have that triggers First Amendment issues, right, and First Amendment protections. And the government has to be very careful to differentiate between somebody blowing off steam. One of the things I tell students is the First Amendment does not just entitle you to polite speech, right? You're allowed to be angry.
Yeah.
You're allowed to be worked up. And so for governmental actors and law enforcement, they have to watch that line of when is somebody expressing their anger, which they're allowed to do, or beyond that, engaging in law breaking. But First Amendment cases, I think, are on the horizon as well as voting cases.
Do we, our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube viewers, as well as myself, get any more free advice you give to your students here? I'd love to hear some.
No, not off the top of my head. It's right, but the don't talk was a good one. I mean, that's good advice for anybody who's in legal trouble. Stop talking.
We'll wrap this up with a few more questions, Brendan, and I just want to reiterate for our viewers here, your insight has been exceptional. Yesterday, during our 4 hours of coverage, when we checked in with you, can't thank you enough for that. I can't thank you enough for spending time with us here to help explain what we could potentially be seeing in an unprecedented election. As far as counting the votes, just for those that have tuned in late, these counts that are going on as we speak right now and have this conversation, President Trump has asked for those to be stopped in states where he's trailing. He has asked for those to continue in states where he was leading, or vice versa. Let's flip that around. He asked for that to stop in states that he was leading, asked for them to continue in states that he was trailing. From your legal background, your basis, your expertise, what are the chances that any of these ballots that are being counted as we speak do get thrown out?
Unless there's a technical problem with the ballot, I think the likelihood is very low. Of course, if Pennsylvania has this thing about privacy sleeves, right? That they can not count a ballot that doesn't have that. So there are things like that can get ballots thrown out. But I don't see any federal court intervening to wholesale block the counting of votes. And in fact, the federal judge in Texas had the opportunity to do that a couple days ago. And
you're talking about Harris County, right, with the drive-through
yes.
with voting? Yep.
That's right. And it happened to be a very conservative judge in the case, but he was having nothing to do with that claim. He just said, you have an uphill battle when you're trying to convince a federal judge to throw out 127,000 votes. When the voter himself or herself didn't do anything wrong, right? That's something that courts are very sensitive to. It's one thing if you didn't follow the rules and your ballot was rejected, but if you deposited a ballot in the mail or in a drop box, the way you were told to do that, it's going to be very hard to get that disqualified.
Yeah, we heard some of those naked ballots in Pennsylvania, right? Without the secrecy sleeve. In South Carolina, there was witnesses that needed to be there, when you signed your ballot. Right. So certainly, and you mentioned it, state to state, it kind of varies. That's kind of the issue we're having here is kind of trying to keep up with how each state is doing it. I have one last question for you, and this is just kind of a official semantics of what goes on from here. So these votes that are coming in are unofficial. And I just want to make that clear. Mm-hmm. These aren't official counted votes. There is a process to count these unofficial votes. Then there's, I believe, a 10-day period where they start to not only allow some in states where you can get those ballots that come in through the mail, but provisional ballots, obviously military and overseas ballots as well. You have a process here to when they become official, you submit them to the state, those get submitted to the Electoral College, and then Congress meets. Can you take us through that timeline so those listening can understand what the next steps would be if post-election litigation doesn't end up the way that one side wants it to?
Yeah, one of the key date, really, I think this year is December 8th, which that's the date at which there's a presumption of normalcy. That basically Congress says, if you get us your certified, as you say, right, official certified election results by that date, then we presume that everything is in order and we simply accept it. If a state goes beyond that date, then Congress has more leeway in deciding whether to accept the electoral votes or not. It's ultimately up to Congress, right, what to do in accepting those votes. So that's actually the date that the Supreme Court used in Bush versus Gore, right, to say that's when we want the whole thing resolved. So that's when states have to have that in. They can submit earlier if they want. The Electoral College actually meets later and votes. And then in early January, I believe it is, the Senate, right? This can be really hard for a vice president who's lost an election. Al Gore had to do this. He presided over the Senate as the electoral votes were read out and accepted. So that's it's all a bit ceremonial, right? Mm-hmm. Because obviously once the media calls the election, we all know who won, and we start calling them president or president-elect if they're a new president. But all of those steps are set out in the Constitution, and the dates are set by Congress.
I want to thank you, Brendan, for giving us one of your free law classes here on Tampa Bay on our digital platforms. Your expertise, your knowledge, your students are very lucky to have you. We're certainly lucky to have you here in the Tampa Bay area as the professor, obviously at WMU, Cooley School of Law, but here in the Tampa Bay area, I know is where you reside. Thank you so much for your time, for your expertise. Get some sleep, get some dinner. We're all going to sit here and certainly see what happens with the outcome of these results, and I hope we're lucky enough again. Well, maybe not lucky enough again to have you on if we don't have any issues here, but certainly would love to get your expertise down the road. Thank you so much again, Brendan.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Go to Tish? All right, perfect. Brendan, again, thank you. I know I was long-winded there, but we really are so grateful for your time. So
it's a pleasure. Yep. Happy to be here. So.
Be well, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Have a good night.
All right, you too.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you.